Um, Educational eligibility criteria is a different horse. Most people who qualify under medical criteria will also qualify educationally, but not all. Uh, uh, we don't diagnose in the educational setting. We determine eligibility for services. This is a team decision made with people on an evaluation team within the school district. A lot of school districts think that they have to go outside and find a medical practitioner, some sort of provider who also says this person has autism, this individual. Absolutely love to have that information and consider it, but we don't require that we have a medical diagnosis in order to find somebody eligible in the schools.
Right.
Not necessary.
And not that it's important to you particularly, but Missouri is very unique in that it does not require a medical diagnosis in order for a school team to determine that a child can be served through special education with the label of autism. And no one has ever had to pronounce that youngster diagnosed medically with autism. In that respect, Missouri's different. You can look all around us, Kansas and Iowa and Nebraska and Arkansas and Illinois and Kentucky and all the little states that touch Missouri. You have a medical diagnosis. But in Missouri, you do not need a medical diagnosis in order for a school to serve a youngster with the special education of autism.
There's criteria that we have to go by, and the first one is required, and a person who is determined eligible for services under autism in the schools needs to show disturbances in speech, language, cognitive issues, and nonverbal communication. Can you find this out from tests? A little bit. We use some standardized tests, but this is mostly observed. It's behaviorally defined. We do a lot of observation. A lot of looking at history and so on. The next one's also a required criteria, and I'll let Joni tell you about that one.
Disturbances in the capacity to relate appropriately to people, objects, and events. And this is really the required criteria that when you were probably going to work with an individual with autism, in your job sites and in your training programs to get an individual ready to transition from perhaps their school environment into the world of work. Though that ability to relate appropriately and have those social skills with people in their environment and coworkers, this is where a lot of focus in our school program needs to be, because it's those relationships that make or break the people that we serve with autism. Most employers are not going to get upset if somebody hangs a dress on 2 hangers instead of 1, or maybe stops working because they ran out of hangers and didn't ask for more hangers. But what they are going to get released for is being disrespectful, leaving their job site and wandering around the store, yelling inappropriately, getting upset. Those behaviors, those social behaviors, are what makes the difference in our grown-up, if you will, persons with autism.
We also look at, in terms of maybe not being able to use objects in the way they were intended.
Right.
That would also be included in this criteria. Unusual attachments to objects.
Yes.
We see that a lot, especially in our younger kids with autism. And then not being able to sort of organize the events of the day. One of the things that we do in schools is provide a visual schedule so that kids can look at a schedule and go, this is happening first, then this, then this, then this. Sometimes it's real difficult for kids to predict the events of the day, and that causes a lot of anxiety and ultimately some behavioral issues. And so we look at those 2 things as well in this criteria.
And while this next criteria is not required, we really look at it closely. And it has to do with history of developmental rates and sequences in a youngster, and getting a good, thorough background on the history of your individual is important. A youngster might, for example, sit up one day, or they might get up and walk without crawling for very long. Or you may have a youngster who didn't speak for a long time, but at the age of 5 or 6 asked you to please pass the iced tea in a full and complete sentence. But the developmental rates and sequences are out of order of what you would see a typically developing youngster have. And those can be quite common. But unless you ask about that, there won't be any way for you to know.
Right. It's not just delayed development. It's
Right.
development that, as Joni said,
Ahead of
out of
himself,
order.
yeah.
And, yeah, unusual development. And then disturbances of response to sensory stimuli. We've talked about that already, but being able to keep your body regulated, being able to take in that sensory information and use it as is expected. And a lot of our kids really struggle in this area.
And something as a job coach, if any of you work with individuals out in the field, either they're high schoolers or they're transitioning, being aware of a person's environment and the temperature and what that person's individual maybe triggers or are as far as the sensory regulation goes might go a long way in helping you with some unusual behavior that you might be seeing in your person that you're working with.